Every time I open social media, I hear people saying that Canada is doomed, Canada is not worth it anymore, everybody is leaving Canada. Is this true? Yes, people are leaving Canada, but that fact alone does not tell us whether Canada is failing as a state or maybe people are just misunderstanding what's going on and being overly dramatic. When you actually examine the reasons that people cite for leaving Canada and put them into perspective, the picture changes. So in this video, I will break down the most common reasons that people cite for leaving Canada and show you what's really going on behind each one. By the end of this video, you will be able to decide for yourself whether Canada is really doomed or it's still worth living in and immigrating to. I've lived in Canada as an immigrant for over 12 years. This video is based on real-life conversations with immigrants, official statistics, and my own experience of living in Canada and building a life in Canada as an immigrant. Before we talk about why people are leaving Canada, I wanted to clear up one important thing. Canada has always had people coming in and people leaving. You will often see headlines like a record number of Canadians are leaving Canada. But is this actually the case? Let's look at the numbers. This graph here shows how many people left Canada between 2017 and 2025. And I don't know about you, but I do not see such a dramatic change as the media is screaming about. There have been dips and spikes, and there's a slight upward trend, but is it actually that significant? So it's not so much about movement itself and how many people are leaving, but about a way we talk about and how loud social media has become. Individual frustrations are often presented as a national collapse. A bad housing experience becomes Canada is finished. A difficult job search becomes there's no opportunities left. But another thing that we need to acknowledge is timing. Many of the things we hear about are happening after a global pandemic, during high inflation and rising interest rates, and major demographic shifts. But remember that this is not just happening in Canada, but across the developed world. So when someone says that Canada is not worth it anymore, the real question is compared to what and for whom? Because what works for a single professional in their 20s may not work for a family with children. What feels impossible in Toronto may actually look very different in another province. And what feels disappointing after 2 years may actually look way better after 5 or 10. So this video is not about denying problems. Canada indeed has a lot of challenges and we will go over them one by one. But it's about separating systemic issues from exaggerated narratives and short-term pressures from long-term reality. So with that in mind, let's go over the most common reasons that people cite for leaving Canada and find out what's happening behind each one. By far the most common reason is housing. Rent is high, home prices feel out of reach, and for many people, especially in major cities, the frustration is real. It's crazy, but in cities like Toronto or Vancouver, the average price of a house is well above $1 million. And rent is telling a very similar story. A one-bedroom apartment in these cities can go for about $2,300 to $2,500 per month. And maybe the salaries in these cities are higher than the national average, but it's still not enough to buy a house. An average house like this in the suburbs of Toronto would probably cost around $1 million. With a minimum of 5% down payment and mortgage insurance amortized over 30 years, your monthly payment will come to about $5,000 to $5,500 per month, including interest. Say you have a job with a median salary of about $97,000 per year. That's roughly about $8,000 per month before tax. Your mortgage payment would take about 60 to 70% of your monthly income. But you also have groceries, transportation, childcare, and other expenses on top of that, so it becomes very, very tight. Canada's housing prices are extremely unaffordable relative to the income levels, especially when you compare to other developed nations. Home prices increased by almost 65% faster than income since 2005. Canada now consistently has one of the highest price-to-income ratios in the world. If you look at G7 countries, the gap between real estate prices and income in Canada is the largest, and since about 2015, the gap is growing exponentially. Canada is uniquely challenged by long-term structural problems, where housing costs have become severely disconnected. But there is one crucial factor that people tend to forget. Canada does not have one single housing market. Outside of the bigger cities, affordability is much better. What people usually mean when they say that housing is impossible in Canada is housing in major cities like Toronto or Vancouver, or maybe some surrounding areas. These cities face extreme pressure because of a combination of several factors, like population growth, limited land, slow construction, very high concentration of jobs, so people are motivated to move to these cities. It doesn't make the situation acceptable, but it does make it specific. Outside of these areas, the picture is very different. Rent is more affordable, home prices are significantly more accessible, and and the competition is way lower. For example, a 1 million in Greater Toronto area will probably give you a smaller home, maybe 2-3 bedrooms, semi-detached or a townhouse. And somewhere in Winnipeg, you can actually buy a large, modern, detached home with a spacious yard and a nice neighborhood. And yet many people rule out these options before seriously considering them. Not because there's no work, but because the location doesn't really match their original expectations. But I think with remote work becoming a new part of our reality, moving to a less concentrated area is making more and more sense now. And when it comes to newcomers, a lot of them think that success means living in these major cities like Toronto or Vancouver immediately and permanently. And when that doesn't work out, the conclusion becomes that Canada is entirely unaffordable. Another important factor is timing. Housing conditions today reflect years of underbuilding and sudden increase in demand. Some people leave Canada because they're hitting the housing market at the worst possible time. So they think that it will never improve or even become worse over time. Recent data and short-term forecasts already shows some cool down in housing prices. Realistically, this will not solve the housing crisis. Actually, we probably will never go to pre-pandemic levels, never mind early 2000s. But prices in Canada are expected to rebound in the near future. And hopefully this will be supported by lower mortgage rates and various government programs for first home buyers. When housing becomes the reason that people leave, it's not because the housing is completely unaffordable. It's probably because it's difficult where they want it and when they want it. And that distinction matters because it doesn't mean that Canada is completely unlivable. It just means that Canada requires a little bit more flexibility, mobility, and long time horizon that many people just don't have. Another common reason I hear is that people cannot find a good job or that the job market is dead. Let's look at the numbers. In 2025, generally, the unemployment rate in Canada has hovered at about 7%, and it just hit the lowest rate at 6.5% in November. This is higher than pre-pandemic and immediately after pandemic, but it's still pretty moderate. It is also higher than in the United States or Asian economies, but still lower than some European countries like Spain or Finland. So why is it so hard to find a job then? The problem is that unemployment alone is not the best metric and does not show the entire picture. For example, this counts part-time employees or temporary workers who technically work full-time, but they're not happy with what they do and they probably just took on these jobs as a survival job and they're looking for something else in the meantime. It also doesn't say anything about the mismatch between the available jobs and the candidate's skills. And finally, it does not show how hard it is to start a career in your selected field. And this is especially true for newcomers who do not have Canadian experience, and they often have to take additional steps to have their degrees recognized, to get the appropriate license, and to actually start working and practicing in Canada. You will often hear stories about former doctors driving Ubers, and believe me, those are actually real cases. I don't have anything against Uber drivers, but it's just not what they expected when they came to Canada. The problem with Canada is that it is very regulated and it requires very specific credentials and licenses and degrees for working in certain fields. I have a separate video on that if you are interested, highly recommend. So we opened up immigration streams to fill high demand sectors like healthcare, trades, STEM professions, transport, agriculture, and education, but we also impose very strict licensing procedures to allow these people to practice. In addition to have their degrees recognized, they also have to complete additional exams and usually pass residency programs, and the spots in these programs, unfortunately, are very limited as well. But remember that leaving Canada for another country will not miraculously solve these credential barriers because every country has their own. Yes, it can be hard to find a job in Canada and the competition is real, but it's not because there are no jobs, it's just because breaking into a new labor market can take time. And once people break through, they generally do better than in other countries with weaker labor protection and unstable economies. Okay, another frequent complaint that I often hear from people is that Canada has very high taxes and we're not getting much in return. Canada actually does have higher income tax than many countries in the world, including the United States. Income tax in Canada is progressive, which means the more money you make, the more taxes you pay proportionally. And the tax is applied in brackets on different portions of your pay. For example, the first $57,000 are taxed at 14.5%, the next $57,000 are at 20.5%, and so on up until 33%. But this is just the federal level. You also have to pay the provincial tax on top of that. So let's take a high income example to look at the numbers. In Ontario, once you get above about $250,000 per year, the extra money you make is taxed at roughly 53.5%. That's combined federal and provincial, meaning that over half of those additional dollars go to tax. But that only applies to the top portion of your income. Your average tax rate will actually be closer to 35-40% when you have everything added up and credits applied. I agree, this is high compared to a lot of countries in the world, but it's still not among the top, especially if you look at countries like Denmark, Finland, or Japan. And then you also need to consider where taxes buy. For example, Canada funds universal healthcare, meaning that necessary medical services are not billed directly to the patient. And that contrasts with a lot of other countries like the United States, for example, as you're well aware, where your bills can add up to tens of thousands of dollars if you don't have a proper insurance. I will admit it that the healthcare system is far from perfect, but it does protect you from financial risk associated with serious illnesses. And taxes also support other social services, for example, very affordable education, long parental leaves, pension plans, and so on. To give you an example, studying at McGill University, which is top 1 university in Canada and 27 in the world, costs under $3,000 per semester for Quebec residents. Mothers get a full year of paid maternity leave. Trust me, I used it myself, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to spend the entire year with my daughter. Employment insurance and pension plans then provide support for unemployed and retired people. And what you need to remember is that all of those are the basics that are not guaranteed everywhere in the world. A different question is that not all of our taxes are spent the right way. We give the government a huge chunk of our income, and somehow it still feels like everyday life is very expensive and difficult. We see spendings on programs that just don't make sense and we don't get to benefit from them. We see cost overruns and delays, long healthcare waits, school funding gaps. These are very legitimate questions, but in my opinion, they're not enough to say that Canada is doomed and not worth it anymore. As someone who was born and raised in Russia, believe me, I'm just happy that these taxes are not used to build palaces for somebody or start wars. So I very much appreciate the public services that I'm getting here. Yet another reason people cite for leaving Canada is healthcare. We claim that we have universal healthcare, but some systemic issues make it less and less accessible, unfortunately. About 6.5 million Canadians, that's over 1 in 5 people, do not have a family doctor. A family doctor is your primary point of contact. You go to see a family doctor when something is bothering you, and either they will treat it themselves or they will refer you to a specialist. And without a family doctor, your only hope is to go to a walk-in clinic where you can spend hours waiting to be seen by the doctor. The median wait from referral by a family doctor to actually receiving treatment with a specialist is about 28.6. That's over 6.5 months. And a lot of our healthcare in Canada is more reactive than preventative. We will treat conditions as they appear instead of doing regular tests and checkups to prevent them from happening in the first place. Personally, I lost my family doctor a few years ago and I never got a new one. So now I've been trying to get a referral for a dermatologist for my acne. But apparently this is cosmetic, so it's not worth the resources. So when we say universal, we mean that everybody in the country has equal access to medically necessary health services without paying for them out of pocket. The keyword here is medically necessary, so I guess my hormonal acne does not qualify for that definition, and neither does medication or dental care. And this is why a lot of Canadians, including myself, end up getting a private insurance to see somebody faster. But even with that, I would still pick Canada over other countries where you may spend tens of thousands of dollars in emergency or to see a specialist without a proper insurance. To give you an example, I was in the United States this past September, and in the middle of the night my daughter fell off the bed and she hit her nose was bleeding, so we didn't know what to do. Luckily there was a hospital like literally 5 minutes away from our hotel, so we got there. It was about 2 in the morning. We got admitted right away. First we saw a nurse, then we saw a doctor, then we also stayed there for about 4 hours just to monitor and to make sure that she had no concussion. So they just took the information of our travel insurance and they said eventually they will get back to us. We only heard from them several months later, but I saw the bill and I just freaked out. They charged us $1,000 just to stay at the hospital for 4 hours and additional $500 for the doctor's visit. So in my opinion, Canadian system actually does save lives, especially for families with lower income who probably would not be able to afford medical services otherwise. So definitely Canadian healthcare system has a lot of challenges and there's a lot of room for improvement, but it also offers financial protection and broad access that a lot of other countries just don't have. Immigration has has ruined Canada. This is one of the most emotionally charged reasons that people are leaving Canada. They say that newcomers are flooding the system, jacking up demand for housing, stealing the jobs, and abusing public services. So let's see where it's all coming from. Like many other developed countries, Canada has a very real problem of aging population. For the first time in decades, the amount of deaths outnumbered births. Those two words are very difficult for me to pronounce, but I'm sure you understood. Baby boomers are retiring, and the younger generations, like myself, have a hard time catching up and supporting them. And the only thing that is keeping Canadian population growing is the intentional migration. Canadian immigration programs are designed to fill in labor shortages in industries like construction, healthcare, and manufacturing. Do they actually do that? That's a good question. Problem is that Canada is letting people in too fast. It has been admitting hundreds of thousands permanent residents annually. So it's very logical that infrastructure just cannot keep up. We don't have enough schools, doctors, housing. And another problem is overstaying immigrants. For example, somebody whose visa expired and they just decided to stay in Canada, or refugees that take a lot of resources and do not contribute to the economy. And this leads to hate towards all immigrants, regardless of how hard they work or how integrated they are. I see that a lot on my Instagram account, even though I've been here for 12 years. People are saying that I'm taking their resources, I'm just abusing the system, I'm a parasite. So that's very unpleasant, but it is what it is. At the end of the day, immigrants are unwelcome, people here feel pressured, and the system just doesn't work for anybody. The new Canadian government kind of acknowledged the problems and came up with an immigration level plan, hopefully to bring it back to more sustainable levels. But let's be honest, that definitely will not solve the problem overnight. I do not have much to say to counteract this point, even though I'm an immigrant myself. In itself, it may not be enough to cause somebody to leave Canada, but it can very well be the last drop in the decision to leave. Okay, just a few other things that I wanted to mention before we wrap up this discussion. Many people cite weather and darkness as a reason to leave. And honestly, I totally get that. Winters in Canada are harsh and long, and there's nothing really you can do other than getting proper gear and maybe picking up a winter hobby so that you don't feel that depressed. And maybe also just appreciating the change of seasons. I may be biased just because I'm Russian. I was born and raised in Russia. As you know, Russia is very cold as well. So what I actually like about winter is how happy you are during spring. It's just this anticipation is hard to describe. It just makes you appreciate summer way more. Every sunny, warm day, I would just enjoy the entire summer. And summers, by the way, here are pretty long as well. From May to maybe October, they can get very hot. They can be around 30 degrees, and there's a lot to do during summer in Canada. So definitely something to look forward to and maybe worth the 6 months of winter. People also mention social isolation and mental health challenges when they try to settle as newcomers. And this is very real, especially in rural or suburban areas. But again, these are about adjustment difficulties and need for community, and not about the fatal flaws of the country. And these are the challenges that you are going to have in any country you decide to immigrate to. So don't forget to subscribe to my channel, because I share a lot of tips for settling down in Canada, including social and cultural integration. So yes, there are pressures and pain points, but many of these reasons are also global and temporary. So like I said earlier, the real question here is not whether Canada is worth it, but worth it for whom, when, and compared to what. It's always about priorities and trade-offs. Everybody is deciding for themselves which factors are more important for them. I decided for myself that the benefits outweigh the problems. So I'm staying in Canada. I'm planning to stay in Canada. And I just want people to think twice before deciding to leave and just give Canada another chance. The challenges that Canada is facing, they're not the signs that it's doomed. They're signs that it's worth fighting for. People do not complain about a sinking ship. They complain about a house they want to live in. And here's a real test. Despite all of these numbers, a lot of people are still applying to immigrate here. They're not seeing it as collapsing. They see opportunities. So if you are feeling discouraged or frustrated, you're not alone. Canada is not perfect, but it's still one of the most stable and safest countries in the world. So if we stay engaged and we stay informed and we push for changes instead of abandoning the ship, Canada is still worth it. Let me know what you think about it in the comments below.